Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Robertson, and I'm the chairman of the Santa Barbara Committee on Foreign Relations. And I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon to one of the most incredible places in the world, and was the center of the study of democratic institutions. And so much happened right in the room behind me, with a very, very long table. Those people in the room, and there are 60 of us here today, and I would say there's probably more than 100, because the spirits of the center are here with us, and they're all back in that room and watching what we're going to say about them. To say that Solana is a storybook, I would have to say that's probably a mild interpretation of it. One of the biggest and riveting chapters in the history of Solana is why we're here today. I first want to thank the owners of Solana, the home of Bill and Sandy Nicholson, for their wonderful, wonderful hospitality and their generosity in allowing us to be here today to be with the Center of the Study of Democratic Institutions. And Sandy, thank you so much. There are a few people here who fortunately are not spirits in that room back there. They're actually right in front of me. And they were directly involved with the center, which was between the years of 1957 and 1979 when the center was here. We have Stan Hatch, who was general counsel to Robert M. Hutchins, the founder of the center. We have Liney Mullins, who is the photographer.
Liney Bard.
Bard, excuse me, Liney. Beverly Jackson, who was a journalist for the center. And none other, last but not least, a journalist and a consultant to Robert M. Hutchins, Sander Van Oker. Our meeting today is centered around probably one of the more important figures of the center, the program director, Dr. Graham. Dr. Otis Graham was here for 4 years and was very, very instrumental in so much of what went on here at the center. Dr. Graham, in learning the other day, his office was very close, practically next door, to Robert M. Hutchins. Dr. Graham told me that the closer you got to Dr. Hutchins' office, the more important you were. So, what can I say? Dr. Graham is a professor, a scholar, an intellect, author, award recipient, and as far as the many, many accomplishments in his life. But what's most important about Dr. Graham is the fact that he was here. He was here with the spirit, he was here with the enthusiasm, the thirst for knowledge, the thirst for truth, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the man we're about to hear from. I do not want to take any more time because every minute is precious. But as Dr. Graham is coming to the podium, I'm going to say that We're going to have a question and answer period after his talk, and I will moderate that question and answer period for Dr. Graham. Dr. Otis Graham.
Thank you. If you can't hear me in the back, just raise your hand, and I've been teaching for a long time. I can kick up the volume. I can even change the subject if it's part of the problem. I'm grateful to the owners and our host and hostess. When I came in the front door, I couldn't find my office. It's the one on the left, but it's not an office anymore. The place is great looking. It's not exactly the same. Never mind. The outside is pretty much the same. I know it's the Council on Foreign Relations. All the subject matter of today is not all foreign relations. You don't mind. We'll throw in a lot of things because that's what the center did. In 1965, I took a job here at UC Santa Barbara, a new and sort of green and fresh place in the history department. I knew there were, I didn't know the town. I knew there were some institutions of higher learning in the town. Santa Barbara City College, there's a, you know them all. Someone said there's also the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. What? I can't even remember the 4 or 5 words. What is it? And the answer was, on campus, nobody knows on campus what it is. They don't invite us. They don't talk to us. They're in Montecito, and that's about as close as I can get you. They're not hostile, but you want to ask what they are, nobody knows. On campus, we were and expected to remain over there, and they were over here. The news press covered the center a little bit, particularly if it seemed sinister or enticingly left-wing. Almost anything that they could make news. And occasionally you got the impression the center was up there, but that's about as far as it went. My life was changed because that didn't remain the case. By the way, about 10% of what I say may be false, but I think the center was founded in '59. And I also think that it was a hell of a good buy at $550,000, or that's one of the sums that I heard bandied about. It was founded in 1959 by Robert Maynard Hutchins. Who he? I dimly knew, I guess. He'd been the dean of the Yale Law School at the age of 9 or 10. He was so young. He'd been the president of the University of Chicago for a very long time, and very, very, very newsworthy guy. You know he killed football at Chicago, and he did a lot of things with the curriculum. He was news from the day he walked in there, and the rest of his life. He was a critic of higher education, probably the prominent critic of higher education in the United States. I'm not going to spend much time on his critique. You know something about it, perhaps. I learned about it when I came here. He criticized every university, not just Chicago, but not sparing Chicago, in America, for having no common purpose, just to turn out the kids so that they could go to Wall Street or go get a job or whatever, live the conventional life. He criticized higher education in America for specialization to the point where nobody on the campus could talk to anybody else on the campus. This was all kind of familiar to me when I got here in my first university assignment. He used to say universities don't spend any time talking about what our overall purpose should be. The unexamined life, what was the saying? The unexamined life is not worth living. In any event, he tried to reform the University of Chicago from the inside. Got a lot of publicity. Bob used to make lots of speeches. He was a splendid speaker. He was a handsome speaker. He said something, and then when he went home, after having given the speech, he published it as a chapter in his next book. So Bob had probably 21 books. If you wanted to know what Hutchins thought, nobody was hiding it. And he seemed to be drawing a bead on Chicago, but it could spread, couldn't it? That's about all I could learn from talking to people at UCSB. One other thing I want to say, if you ask persistently enough, you found that what they do up there, I was tempted to say something a little off color. I think I will. What do they do up there that we don't do at UC Santa Barbara? They don't do at UCLA. They don't do at Yale. They don't do it at Harvard. What if Hutchins rejected what he saw in American higher education? What are they doing out there in Montecito that is different and better? Well, we had no way of knowing. They didn't invite us. But you could get some indications from here and there. They're out there on a mountaintop. Harry Ashmore said about it, it was beguiling. Hutchins called it El Parthenon. I hope that doesn't offend anybody. It was Hutchins. It's not my fault. Solana is what it should be called, I'm sure. In any event, they're out there on the mountain. You're wondering whether I'm going to deliver on the off-color. Thinking off. That's about as close as we could come. There was occasionally a suggestion that they were following, in their discussions of big issues, the Socratic method. I had no idea what I went in encyclopedias and read about the Socratic method, and it was not clear what, if that's what they were doing, it's not clear what that amounted to. There was turmoil apparently at the center over the future of the center as Hutchins got older. You could pick up news stories in the local press or in the national press about fellows coming together in cabals, differing with Hutchins, people being fired, and the search for a successor to Hutchins brought forward Malcolm Moose, the president of the University of Minnesota. That didn't work out. There was turmoil up there. I knew nothing about all of this. There was no way to know it if you wanted to know it. Then I got a phone call. The phone call came from Harry Ashmore. How did I know Harry Ashmore? He was the Pulitzer Prize-winning editor of the Arkansas Gazette, and a distinguished American. Senator knows him. A lot of you knew Harry. He lived here in Santa Barbara for a long time. Harry called me and said, Bob Hutchins and I want to have lunch with you tomorrow. Wow. What for? We'll have lunch and we'll tell you. And they told me that the institution had fallen on difficult times, financially, and difficult times politically. And they had decided that while they had originally had no relationship with the University of California, either this branch or the other 8 campuses, they decided that they couldn't go forward under the circumstances as they evolved if they didn't form a relationship to the campus. Ashmore knew me. I was a young, 42, professor of history. I don't know that I had any qualifications, really, except Harry knew me, and I won't go into how I knew him, but we're both Southern boys. So I went and had lunch, and they told me that they needed me to be a liaison to all of the campuses of the University of California, plus Stanford, plus whatever campuses around are close enough to us so that it's not too expensive to get people to come here. And we want you, Otis, to be the liaison, bringing talent and bringing ideas and being the director of the program. I think you promoted me with some word that you used. I liked it, but I was director of the program. I want to say that I wasn't really director of the program, but I'll try to build up an understanding of what I did when I came in that door and went in that office, which is to the left, but I couldn't get in it this evening because it's been changed so much. Well, anyway, you have lunch, and it's a great lunch. They ask you to come out here. I said, I'm a full-time professor. They said, talk to your chancellor. We want at least half of your time, and we want you to come out here and get to work immediately. I don't know why I did that. I wasn't supposed to be doing that. But the chancellor was Vernon Cheadle, and he took a generous line on this and said, go ahead, Otis. At the end of a year, come back in and ask me if you can continue. We want you to be a professor but you can take a year and do this. And so I just took a year and did this. And Hutchins said to me, "You're program director now." Oh, I brought a letter he wrote to me, which he should never have done. I kept this letter. It's my letter of appointment, I guess. But I kept it for something that he said. I'm still trying to figure Hutchins out. So here's a little puzzle. Otis, I am delighted that you are willing to commit yourself to being director of the program, blah. The purpose of this note, in addition to expressing my pleasure, is to assure you that you are in full command. That's Bob Hutchins telling me I'm in full command. I'll try to do anything you want me to do, but the academic program is yours. I've had this on my wall for a long time. Every day it seems weirder. I was not in full command. He was in full command. So what he was really saying was, come in and work for me and with me. And he said, Otis, I want you to start this way. We got 22 boxes down in the basement. They are the program boxes. Each box has a program in it that we have done in the past. I want you to take the 22 boxes, start reading and read them as fast as you can read them, and when you have read all the way through, come in the office and we will talk. And you tell me which of the 22 boxes has intellectual life in it and which ought to be dropped, and then let's get on with it. With the talent, we have a little talent around here. I found out that the fellows had been fired and the fellows had gone away, but there were a few fellows sprinkled around town. So Bob said, with those fellows who know what we do out there, and with your smart friends, if you've got any smart friends, we intend to go forward to another phase of the life of the center. So there's what he told me to do, take the 22 boxes. And he said, by the way, 3 boxes are special. The 3 boxes that are special, I plan to make this clear to you. And he indicated that I should keep my hands off, but I could look inside. One was the law of the seas. Seas is not S-E-I-Z-E, but the watery seas. The other is Pacem in Terris. Pacem in Terris is an encyclical by Pope John. And in both those subjects, Law of the Seas and Pacem in Terris, the center had been programming full tilt for several years, spent lots of money, developed lots of expertise. They were into it, and they didn't want me to step in the way. So I was basically told, let those programs go on. They're funded. We know how to do it. Elisabeth Borgese handles the Law of the Seas. Pacem in Terris is Harry's and several other people. And Otis, you can lift them off your shoulder if you like. What's the third one? The third one was Rex Tugwell's new Constitution of the United States, which I never understood. I never understood the Law of the Seas because Elisabeth Mann-Borgese basically jealously and brilliantly, really, ran that program on her own. The Pacem in Terris was run by other people. The Rex Tugwell Constitution and the need for a new Constitution is something that Rex handled. So I didn't have 22 boxes, I had 19. And anything else I wanted to throw in there? Well, it was a beginning. They had done other things. Hutchins convinced the Ford Foundation to give him $16 million. Hutchins could get money from Iraq, which was part of the problem. But I took the 19 boxes and did the best I could. I want to say a few things about how it worked out. When they set up this place and turned it into a center, it had been a home, of course, like it is now. Where was I going with that? Oh, Hutchins had convinced, you don't give somebody $15 million if they don't have a kind of a pitch that's convincing to a lot of people on your board. And the center convinced the Ford Foundation that their program would be not the usual problems of the day. What were the problems of the day in the 1950s and 60s? You don't need me to tell you that. We had racial problems, we had Watergate, we had the Vietnam War. You don't need me to tell you that. They had always programmed on the things of the day. But Hutchins was restless about the topics of the day. How imaginative is it, or ain't it, to program on Watergate and to program on the Vietnam War? They programmed on these usual things, the hot buttons of the day. But Hutchins was always looking for something. Hutchins, and he never ordered anybody to do anything. He encouraged the fellows to find subjects. Well, what's the title of the place? The Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. What's that? It's whatever he said it was. And they studied the lower education system. They studied the welfare problem. They studied technology. They studied the condition of American corporations and American labor unions. So that's what the other 19 boxes were all about. And I was invited to make more boxes if I could convince Hutchins. You understand Bob Hutchins when I tell you this. It took me a long time. Never got it all the way. This is from Harry Ashmore's book, which is a very good book. There are 4 or 5 books on Hutchins, 3 of them quite good. In his approach to all of his studies at the center, Hutchins emphasized his own view that they could not be dealt with in terms of national sovereignty, which he believed to have been outmoded by the interdependence required for survival in the nuclear age. I almost am tempted to do that again so you get it. Everybody inside that door operated under Hutchins' basic assumption that nations are not the point. That's why they paid almost no attention to Israel. They paid almost no attention to the Soviet Union is in a different case. It's a nuclear power. I think that sentence is worth doing again. His own view that they could not be dealt with, the problems of the day, in terms of national sovereignty, which he believed to have been outmoded by the independence required for survival in the nuclear age. Now, as I was writing my notes about what the program was when I tried to bring my own little contribution to it, I saw that there's something funny here right in my path. Elisabeth Mann, Thomas Mann was her father, Borgese was one of the colorful characters. Let me say something about her. She came in very rarely. When she came in, she brought in 2 white poodles. I found out in Harry's book that that's just my memory. She only had 1 white poodle, so let's go down to the 1. And the poodle was a nut, I thought, and Elisabeth only wanted to talk about the law of the seas. And she could talk about it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. She was in charge. And it's a great and important subject. I respected Elisabeth. She wasn't cuddly. But the dog is what I want to talk to you about. I can't talk to you about the law of the seas, which was her assignment. Great subject. Still a subject. We haven't settled it yet. But Elisabeth was not talkable, but I can talk about the dog just very, very briefly. Elisabeth lived alone. And the dog was an important object, as pets are. And she was trying to teach this dog, poodles are smart, right? She was trying to teach this dog in her spare time how to type. You laugh, but what if she'd succeeded? Anyway, one day she came in and she looked glum. And I said, Elisabeth, you having a hard time in some way? And yes, it's the dog. I said, oh, how's the typing going? Well, he arrived at the age of puberty and lost all interest in the typewriter. I'm not going to tell you anything about the law of the seas. I don't know much. It's changed since I knew anything. I'm not going to tell you much about Pacem in Terris, except that they spent more money on Pacem in Terris than God alone could even imagine. It was, I may turn to Harry, I think I'll just tell you, the idea of having a meeting around Pacem in Terris and having a representative from every country in the world. Ashmore goes on and on and on about it. They had 300 diplomats at Pacem in Terris 1. Parchment Terrace 3, by that time they had reached a level of 500. The amounts of money that they were spending on Parchment Terrace to talk about to the American people and to the world peace. That's what the encyclical was. If you've ever read, you probably haven't read the encyclical of Parchment Terrace. It's a brilliant piece of work. If you want to hold a bunch of big world meetings on Parchment Terrace and explore the virtues of the Pope's language, that sounds like a good project. He raised the money and they pursued that for years. I had nothing to do with it. And I'm not complaining. Now, what do I say about the Hutchins Center when did I come? I came in 75. I was here 3.5, 4 years in that office down there someplace. I told Bob that there were thin places where I would have thought the center would be obliged to take them up. Go ahead with Law of the Seas, go ahead with the Constitution, go ahead with Parchment Terrace. And he said, what are they? And I said, it seems to me there's almost no environmental dimension. And he said to me, you haven't been here very long, young fella, but do you know the name Lord Ritchie Calder? And I met him later on, and I've jumped over something. Hutchins was proud of the great minds that he brought together. Did he bring together great minds? Let me give you a few names, and you tell me if they're great minds. Impressive minds. I can make this up, or I can... Arnold Toynbee. I think that's a great mind. It's okay with me. Reinhold Niebuhr. Sounds pretty first rank to me. And in the Chicago years and in the years out here, some of these people were still coming to the center to give talks and to participate in the dialogue. Some of the other names that I met, some of them here and some of them I never met because they had either died or they had been involved in Hutchins earlier in the Chicago years. Aldous Huxley. You're old enough, you know, there's a big name. Or maybe you don't think it's a big name, but he did, and I don't want to quarrel about it. Eugene McCarthy, William O. Douglas. If you just have to sit around with some people that are really interesting and funny, it's Eugene McCarthy, take a deep breath, take a week off, and William O. Douglas. The talent pool that he drew upon was fantastic. The money he spent was equally fantastic. My brother Fred, who was a New York Times reporter and a CBS reporter, said to me, you're associated with Hutchins. You think that that's a center out there. That's show business. That's all that it is. And you can hear that criticism from a lot of people. Well, from the inside, sometimes these Parchment Terrace meetings, they just brought senators after senators after senators and prime ministers of Pakistan, and there was a lot of flashing around of celebrity names. Bob and Ashmore felt that that was one way to draw resources, financial resources, and they had a pretty good record of it. There are other names. Maurice Strong, I had never heard of him. You never heard of him. He gave the most, right in there, he gave the most riveting, fabulous environmental survey of the world I have ever heard or read or seen, and they didn't even tape it, and Maurice Strong never came back. He drifted away, got sick, I don't know. Maurice Strong was a great name, I'm telling you. Let me give you another great name that came in the front door, and I thought, I am so glad that I'm able to be here, was Gunnar Myrdal and his wife Alva. I don't know how many of you would say, Graham mentioned Gunnar Myrdal. I won't spend any more time on it. Gunnar Myrdal is a great name. And he came here 3 times, and I felt blessed. Some people were a little bit of a fraud. Now, I'm going to mention some names. Just a fraud in my point of view, that doesn't mean they're a fraud. Actually, fraud is not the right word. Let's start with, I said that the center's formula had a lot of celebrities in it at big meetings that were very expensive. There was a little celebrity touch that happened right here. We'd be in that room going at it, and we started in that room in there in the mornings when we had something going on at 11 o'clock, and Hutchins would come out of his office, ring the bell, ding, ding, and everybody flocked. When he walked down that hallway, you could hear it. we were ready to start, and we worked for an hour and a half, unless the subject had just got horribly interesting, in which case we worked a little bit longer. Sometime in the course of the daily dialogue, he always called it a dialogue. I want to say more about, it wasn't a dialogue, but he always called it a dialogue. We had some great names. We didn't have very many because they were dying off. The money was not what it used to be, and the great name components thinned out. But we always had great names. I remember there was one dinner in there in which Eugene McCarthy got off the plane. He'd come all the way from Washington. He'd been drinking a little wine. He came in and they said, "Gene, you got anything to say about Washington?" He gave the most funny, brilliant, off-the-record discussion I have ever heard. And all I can do is tell you that this happened. I can't bring you any evidence. Anyway, Ashmore would come to me from time to time. This happened about 5 times, and he would say, "Old Blue Eyes just came through the door." That was one of our celebrities and one of our funders. But who was it? Old Blue Eyes. It was Paul Newman, and Paul Newman would jump in his little convertible and come up here. He was always welcome. He never said one bloody word. And I couldn't stand it any longer, and after, we would have sherry. Bad sherry, I don't know where they got that stuff. And we would come out on this patio, and Paul Newman walked over to the side. People didn't feel real comfortable with Paul Newman. I don't know why. Perfectly seemed pleasant to me. And I said to him, "Mr. Newman, it's great to have you here. It's great to, but you don't say anything." And he said, "And I'm not going to break that record right now." Now I have to tell you the Chester Carlson story, and then I'm getting down on page 4 of my 5. The staff at the front door, behind a desk, guarded the front door. The center wasn't open. It wasn't open to UCSB professors until Otis called. And it wasn't open to anybody. But people would come up here. They would see, we had a sign. Is the sign still down there? It's about this big. It's not big, and it says Center for the, it's probably not there because the center is no longer. But there was a sign, and people would come in, and the door would knock, and the staff would try to talk the person into, "Go away, go away. This is not a public event. This is not a public place. Thank you very much. I don't mean to be rude. Go away." And this little man came in one day. The staff was telling me this story. This didn't happen to me. It's just a story you ought to hear before I die. And they said the little man came in, it was raining, it must have been February, and he said, "You're the center, and you're run by Mr. Hutchins, and you're having a program, and I would love to come." "Well, I'm sorry, sir, but we're not a public, we can't, blah, blah, we can't." And he kept pushing and pushing, and he wanted to come in, and then Hutchins came out of his office right there. And you know it's Hutchins because he's 6'3" at least. And this little man knew that it was Hutchins, and he said, "Mr. Hutchins, they won't let me come in." "Well, what do you want?" "I just want to sit against the wall quietly and listen to this brilliant discussion." "Well, I don't, all right, but don't say anything, and you can do that." So he came and he sat quietly, and we had a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, he went up to Hutchins and said, "I am inspired. I have never experienced an event of this kind. It's uplifting. I want to write you a check." "Well, what's your name?" "My name is Chester Carlson." "Well, Mr. Carlson, it's very nice of you to think about making a contribution, but what do you do?" "I invented Xerox." Oh, that changes everything. Events like that, I think, encouraged Hutchins to go on. Chester Carlson gave the center $15 million over the course of several years. Served on the board, wasn't a dumb little man, very smart, but he was Chester Carlson. I don't know where that leads, and I'll leave you to decide. Did the center make any difference? Hutchins was very uninterested in proving to the people that gave him money that he was educating the public as he said he would do. He was interested in proving it. He was interested in having it be the truth. But he wasn't real good at measuring whenever the board would meet, Hutchins wasn't all that good to say, we're reaching the following huge audience. But I'll say something briefly about the audience. The Center magazine was founded, I think in 68 or 69. I hope you subscribed to it when it was being done. It was a very good magazine, I thought, not an academic magazine. It wasn't supposed to be an academic magazine, but it had a circulation. If you're in the magazine business, listen to this. It had a circulation of 100,000 at the peak. That's a hell of a good circulation. Harper's and New Yorker bleeds your heart out. And people read it, and people not only read the Center magazine, they held meetings all over the country, book club gatherings of people. Hutchins was reaching people. He wasn't good at documenting it. We sent out tapes. We sent out books. Bob Hutchins wrote a weekly column for the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times for years. If you just wanted to look into it, he was putting the message out there, although not everybody could always tell what the message was. But it was internationalism. It was we cannot have a war. It is that nations are outdone. That's the message. We have a message on other smaller matters, like they actually published a couple of articles on the homeless in Santa Barbara. I mean, they could get off track, but they could get on track, and they had an audience. I thought, maybe I'm bragging a little bit, and I had nothing to do, really to do with it. It was the momentum was here when I came. Santa Barbara. Toward the end, Bob started to see that the institution was going to die. It was not going to survive him. Malcolm Moose was not the first, Malcolm Moose. Bob got sick also, but he saw, and he spent some time candidly talking, sometimes just at dinner in there. It's never been a very good center. It's the best center in the world, but it's not a good center, and it's not enough. And he would then blame it on himself. He had a great sense of humor, but he had a great sense of being able to criticize himself. No, by the way, Bob is what his name was. His name was Bob to the gardener. His name was Bob to you. Is Bob to me. Bob to everybody. Not Robert Maynard. Not Robert. It was Bob. And he insisted on it, and he meant it, and everybody called him Bob. And they called him Bob with a great deference. But they called him Bob. That's just a part of what the man was. I was talking about impact. Was it left wing or right wing, this place? Was it left wing or right wing? Otis, you were in here. No, I wasn't in the Chicago part, but I was in this part. Downtown, we had, when I came to Santa Barbara, we had a John Birch Society group, right? Or if you were here. And they hated the center because from what they could read in the local newspaper, the center was a commie outfit. I mean, they believed in the UN. Bob Hutchins used to say about the UN is really lame, but it's all we've got. He didn't program much about the UN. I never understood that, but that's where his heart was. Well, the John Birch people knew that's where his heart was, and that's where the fellows' hearts were. They're a bunch of left-wingers. And whenever we had a session which sounded anti-war too much for somebody or anti-capitalist, there would be dog dung in the mailbox the next morning. I mean, it wasn't easy to be up here saying outrageous things. Let me mention some names of the people around the table and then characterize them. They're not here. I can if I want. There were some great people still here, and they died here. Hutchins took them off the payroll when the payroll shrunk down, and they came to the meetings. And I ran meetings here with the combination of the fellows that were still living around here, tottering in every morning, and the people I could get from UC Santa Barbara. And I want to say something about professors that I got and how it worked out to get professors instead of fellows. And I want to say something about the fellows. Something good about the good fellows, something not so good about the other fellows. It's my right to do that. They all died. The fellows. Where did I? Mortimer Adler. You guys don't, I won't say anything about it. You don't know him. Kip Fadiman. Does that mean anything to anybody? Kip Fadiman. Yes, he was a really, really, really good man. Very highly educated. Bill Gorman, that means nothing, but he had read every Greek 25,000 times. He could do Greek. When we ran out of Greek, when we ran out of Socrates, Bill Gorman was there. We had Kip Fadiman, Elisabeth I've mentioned, Harry Ashmore, Lord Ritchie Calder. Oh, and then there was my favorite. There were a couple of fellows I didn't like, and it didn't make any difference whether I liked them or not. They were the fellows. If they had a relationship with Bob, that was fine. And I, of course, had to treat them properly. They're a part of the family here. And a couple of people I want to mention, I especially don't miss them. A guy in Britain wrote a book. You wouldn't have read the book. You've forgotten about the book, but it was called Joy of Sex. And that was Alex Comfort, thank you. Good for you. Alex Comfort. Well, Alex Comfort, why, as I mentioned, I'm only going to give him another 8 seconds. He came in here and sat in the same chair every morning, and he brought out the longest, blackest, black Cuban cigar you ever saw, and he smoked it right there. It took the whole time, the whole hour and a half, and he would smoke it down at that end. I sat at this end, Bob sat at this end. By the way, Bob tried to get me to sit in the center chair because I was program director. I would not allow it. He sits in the center chair, Otis sits to the left. But Alex Comfort, he had no respect for the purity of the air in Santa Barbara, so I'm down on him. And he and Hutchins sued one another, and he went away. The other person I want to mention that I never got along with, but he's talented, and he was a fireball, was Harvey Wheeler, the author of Failsafe. Bestseller, and he was smart. He was plotting all the time. If there was ever a problem, Harvey was at it again. That was my... What am I telling a story about everybody's talented. Everybody loves Bob. And all of them in their own way were interesting. And we put out a lot of very fine stuff, more than Bob would ever admit. Then the end came. Bob got sick. And the university started to show some interest in it. Oh, I didn't tell you this real quickly. When Bob got here, he picked up the phone, he called the chancellor. The chancellor was Sam Gould. You don't need to remember that, there'll be no quiz. Sam Gould was they tell me, I never met him, he was a smart guy. Hutchins went out there and they said, I'd like a relationship with the University of California, Santa Barbara, even though you are a very small school. And your library is well under 1 million. I mean, Bob didn't flatter Sam Gould, he just told him, maybe we could bring something you don't have. And maybe you got something we don't have. And Sam Gould then said, I'm interested, let's meet again. And then he left. And Vernon Cheadle came. And Vernon Cheadle called Bob and said, there will be no relationship between UCSB and the center. And there wasn't until they gave it to me to try to manage it as much as possible. Having said that, I want to say something about how it worked. The University of California, Santa Barbara wasn't in 1965 when I got here a great world university. It has made fabulous progress. But UCLA didn't need to make fabulous progress. They were making progress. Berkeley, Stanford. There are a lot of great universities out here. And Hutchins said, Otis, you can get them all. If you've got brain power, bring it in here. We're running out of brain power. And so I went to the campus and tried to bring people out. And he said, I imagine they won't be quite intellectually up to the standard of some of the people. I said, Bob, It's a small university. We got some smart people. He said, really? You got smart people at UCSB, this little school that started up here as a state college? What is it? He didn't put it quite that bluntly, but he had that attitude. Well, he read every day, he read something like 20 to 30 law reviews, piled them up and read through them just like a machine. And he said to me one day, Otis, the Yale Law Review has an article by a man named Fingerette, and he's at UCSB. Like, what an insult to the Yale Law Review. I said, yeah, I know Herb Fingerette. Could you get him to come out here and talk to me about the subject of the, yeah, I'll get him. Herb came, and Herb Fingerette, he happened to be the smartest guy on campus. I knew that. But Bob didn't know that. He didn't think there was a smartest guy on campus. And Herb Fingerette came. I will shorten this story by saying, the campus responded positively. They liked it when I called somebody and said, would you come out next week? It's on a subject. I called Garrett Hardin. Garrett would come. People, the economists, there weren't enough of them, but they would come. The campus responded. And there was more brain power out there than Bob thought. To his credit, he started to admit that you've got some pretty good people in the university. And we reached out to UCLA. What's not missing down here at UCSB for an institution like this, headed by Bob Hutchins? What's wrong over there at UCSB? Bob's first thought was, it just isn't a great institution, it's too young. But the answer is really more important. There is no law school. There's no medical school. There's no school of environmental public policy. There's no business school. It's UCSB. It's going to build some of these schools. So Bob said to Otis, then get UCLA guys, get Berkeley guys. And I reached out, and I found that the University of California responded to this place. Does that mean that I'm coming to an end here? Have I concluded that the University of California and a place like this, if it ever started up again, are a match? Well, I'm confused. My life here gave me evidence that they are a match. But there are problems with the marriage between a university and this place. So that's a good subject for another day. Bob said when he was moaning about how he'd failed, right here he'd failed. He failed in Chicago too, but he thought he failed here. He said, tenure. I never should have allowed tenure. You people shouldn't allow tenure. Higher education shouldn't have tenure. I'm against tenure. Tenure is a mistake. And I gave in on tenure, and that was a mistake. Secondly, I always let the thing get too damn big. How many people did he want in there? He hadn't thought it through, but as the years went by, he started to think there's too many in there. And the number that he came up with, I don't know where he came up with it. 16. 16. Let me be sure there's not a nugget here, and I'm coming to the end of the nuggets. Tenure. Oh. He tried to be a force, as you look back on it, for change inside America's universities, which had many of the flaws, as far as I'm concerned, that he criticized. They still got the flaws that he criticized. And he tried to make a change. He learned that people would give him money to pursue public education outside the universities. With large sums of money from Chicago foundations and hundreds of individuals, he focused his life on a vision of an academy where a few, 16, great minds, fell a little short sometimes, dedicated to a Socratic dialogue, whatever that was, and he never figured it out, would clarify and broaden the circles of discussion of our basic institutions. The result of that dream was this building right here, which I have recounted a little bit. It's easy to mock. I even do it myself. Amounts of money spent in huge convocations on well-paid fellows living in Montecito and working in El Parthenon and staying in fancy local hotels. But I can't leave it at that as I come to the end of my thinking about it. The Center's magazine, as I said, reached 100,000. Its tapes and local gatherings, thousands more. And for the few who were there, me, lucky, for the few who were there and could get close to it, these were unforgettable presentations. He admitted his own mistakes. He let it get too large, he let it get too expensive, and he never solved the governance problems that universities have around tenure. He never solved them either. I remember saying, well, why didn't you? I must have been drinking some of that bad sherry. And I think the answer was interesting. What was it? Oh, he said, I'm not, people say I'm a great man, Otis. I can't be a great man. I can't even quit smoking. He would, when you got serious with him, he would get lighthearted very often. I wanted to say one last thing. Oh, did I tell you why the center came here? No, I didn't tell you that. I was talking too fast about other things. There's so much to say. I'll tell you why it's here, and then if he had it to do over again, I'll make a guess about, was he right to want to come here? The Ford Foundation gave them $15 million. They could be anywhere they wanted to be. Bob said New York. Why New York? Center of the world. And an investor said, I don't like New York. And they had a Christmas invitation to come out here and stay with some friends here, and they stayed with some friends. The investor said, I love Santa Barbara and Montecito. And Bob said, what about Chicago? This is nothing out here. This is not even Los Angeles. And this little dinky university out here, investor said, Bob, I want it to be in Montecito. So it's in Montecito. That's the answer to that one. I think I've said enough to get us started with a backflow. Could you hear, or did you not say anything because you didn't want to hear it?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, Otis, and we'd like to have some questions. If I can get this, well, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
We can have some questions to Otis. I can tell you we're probably going to be all here till dark. And then you won't be able to read your notes. Anyway.
Oh, I had one last thing, so when we're done,
I knew you did.
I knew I had one more. Well, let's do the Q&A.
Yeah, let's do
and then
the
whenever
Q&A.
the Q&A is over, which may be quick, I've got one more really good one, and it has to do with something inside. I don't want to leave here tonight without giving you this little story about something inside. But go ahead with whatever was on your mind as I talked.
Any questions to Otis?
Let's hear what he's holding back.
You want to hear what I'm holding back?
Yeah.
I'll do that. Oh, I told you about the dog that couldn't play. That's not the one. It's, I can't make this one up. I've got to find it because it was written by Harry, but it's about a text that was very important to us, but not quite important enough. He moved it. It was his fault. I'm going to find it. I want to find it. When you go inside, it's not in there, but you can buy a replica of this thing I'm going to mention anywhere in town, I think. Just take a deep breath there. I don't care about law of the seas. They don't either. It's in the Ashmore book. Yes, I got it. When it was time for us to have a meeting, a dialogue, I should have said, does anybody here know what a dialogue is supposed to be? In the dialogue, Socrates sits at the head of the table and starts asking questions of the person that put out an idea. And Socrates, being Socrates, straightens out all of the flaws and they all go home happy. That's the dialogue. Bob wouldn't do that. He wouldn't interrupt. I came out here thinking that the dialogue, I've heard so much about Hutchins' dialogue. He's got microphones hidden under every chair. He's got buzzers that will buzz you if you don't. There must be something to this dialogue. There was nothing. Nothing. He wasn't even willing to tell you to shut up. He wasn't willing to say, I listened to you for 30 minutes this afternoon, and you didn't make sense but once, and I'll tell you what it was. Socrates was a kind of a hard nose. Bob Hutchins wasn't a hard nose. It's a wonderful trait, but he wasn't. I'm coming to the plaque in there. So anyway, we would go to the dialogue. He would walk down you could hear him walking, and everybody would flock, and we would do our thing. And there was a bell. He would ring the bell, and when you could hear the bell all over this place. I don't know what happened to the bell. I should have taken it down and kept it for my grandchildren, but actually I think I gave it to Vespa. But anyway, there was above the bell, there was a little plaque, and the plaque was some language from a Roman somebody. And Bob should have read it and prayed over it and followed it more closely than he ever did. This is my last valedictory. And it runs this way. If any pilgrim monk will be content with the customs which he finds in this place, he shall be received for as long a time as he desires here. If indeed he find fault with anything or expose it reasonably and with the humility of charity, the abbot shall discuss it prudently, lest perchance God had sent this person for this very thing. But if he have been found gossipy and contumacious in the time of his sojourn as guest here, not only ought he not to be joined to the body of the monastery, but also it shall be said to him honestly that he must depart. If he does not go, let 2 stout monks in the name of God explain the matter to him. We could have used a little more of that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. It's been a great, great pleasure to be here. Sandy, thank you so much. We really, really love you. Thank you so much. Meeting's adjourned.